I remind you that you have an opportunity to register to get a name tag. I think there's a table out front to do that. I would highly encourage you to do it. I am pleased to introduce today Jason McDougald. You would know him as the camp director for Camp Grier for some 13 years or so. This church has had a long relationship with Camp Grier, and I just learned that we had a congregational retreat up there one time a number of years ago, which is really cool. Jason's been in the outdoor industry professionally for some 40 years, recreationally, basically his whole life. In 1987, his dad opened a store in Greensboro called Appalachian Outfitters. As a young boy would do, hanging around his dad's store, he had friends and mentors, and it became really easy for him to become involved in everything from rock climbing to backpacking to water sports, paddling equipment experience. And so he's done that all around the world. He holds a master's degree in education. He's been a fourth grade teacher. He's been a climbing guide, and he's been a wilderness instructor. And then in 2013, he went to Camp Grier and became the director up there, leading Camp Grier into a new era of this community-based organization to grow outdoor activities in and around Old Fort. He's partnered with the United States Forest Service. For those of you who were on the mission trip in April, you saw the trailheads from Camp Grier going off into the forest, which was really cool. That relationship has led to $8 million being invested in trails and other outdoor recreation infrastructure in Old Fort. It's also created about $80 million worth of nonprofit and impact investments in tourism, workforce development, commercial retail, and workforce housing projects in the community. For those of you that want to sign up for the mission trip to Western North Carolina in October 26th through 30th, just a few weeks away, we'll stay at Camp Grier. We do have cabins with indoor plumbing. It's going to be fun. Here's you do it. Jason, what was your?
David, can I say something real quick? Go ahead on up there.
Turn your mic on so you can.
This guy saved Camp Grier. Camp Grier was on his death knell. And many of you may remember when he came here in the fall, I guess it was 13. And the church was very generous. Several individuals gave some money and tided him over for the first year. He has stretched dollars like nobody's business. And like a lot of you in here, I've been involved in a lot of nonprofits. This guy's at the top of the list in terms of leadership. He has really done a fantastic job. A wonderful introduction. I just want to add my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Here.
Thank y'all. I really appreciate those kind words. It's great to be back. It was great to see a lot of y'all up in Old Fort. Gosh, I don't know, I guess it was last year, and we're looking forward to seeing you again here in a couple of weeks for those that are coming. So about 70 years of Camp Grier history in about 70 seconds so that we can get to the good stuff. But camp was originally founded, it was in 1952, and it was part of the Concord Presbytery at the time. Went on to be owned by 3 presbyteries, Charlotte, Salem, and Western. And then in 2013, when I arrived at camp, the committee from those 3 presbyteries that was managing it decided to put it into its own nonprofit. And so we created a nonprofit, and the church, the presbyteries, to their credit, deeded the property over to that new entity and said, good luck. And you guys in Western made some investments in us early on, and you're seeing the fruits, like John said, of those investments now. So just wanted to give you a quick update or quick history and kind of tell you a little bit about where we came from. So this was camped in 1952. This was the ribbon breaking. And those that were up a year or so ago, you stayed in that cabin. Looks a lot like it did in 1952, with a few upgrades. Let's see, as a saying, click the board. What am I pointing at? There you go. So, First Presbyterian Church Charlotte has been supporting Camp Grier for a long time. So in 1972, when the Supreme Court case allowed busing to happen in Charlotte to integrate schools, First Presbyterian Church, you guys stepped up and said we need to do the same thing with our camp programs. So y'all have been sending funds to Camp Grier for 50 years to support outdoor access for all young people. And so, that relationship is really the thing that made me take the job at Grier. Because if you know anything about camps in Western North Carolina, they're really expensive and they're a great resource to kids. And so y'all have been making that resource available to not only young people from Mecklenburg County, but you really baked that into our DNA and made that something that makes camp stand out. It's really unique and we're really proud of it. So when I got to camp in 2013, like John said, we'll just say it was pretty dusty. There hadn't been a lot of investments in Camp Grier for a while, but it had good bones. It is almost 700 acres and it's completely surrounded by national forest. And it sits in a really unique place between the national forest and the town of Old Fort. So you can see in that map, the pink area kind of there with the yellow trail going through it, that's Camp Grier. So you can see how it kind of bridges this space between all this public lands, which is about 70,000 acres, and the community of Old Fort. And so after a couple of years of just trying to figure out like how are we going to grow this new entity, it became clear that we had a lot of access to these public lands, but we didn't have a lot of infrastructure. So we had a few legacy trails, but we didn't have a lot of trail connectivity or trail diversity that would bring in different user groups. And so Camp Grier, myself, we started reaching out to the U.S. Forest Service to say, what would it look like if we could build trails on national forest land that connected the camp and also connected to the community of Old Fort? And the Forest Service, to their credit, said, well, let's talk about that. And they were open to the idea of expanding the trail network in Old Fort to grow the community. Because we knew if we could build trails, that we could bring people, and those people would bring business, and it would help improve the economy. Because historically, Old Fort was a timber town in the turn of the century that kind of transitioned to manufacturing in the 40s and 50s. And then in the 90s, as manufacturing started to go away, you started to see the town really decline. So in 2020, the Ethan Allen factory that was there kind of closed, and we lost about 350 more jobs. And so we were really seeing the effects of this kind of declining economy. Most of the buildings in Old Fort were boarded up. The only things that you could eat there were McDonald's and Hardee's. And so it was really like times were tough. Like John is not exaggerating. It was rough. But the Forest Service said, let's talk about what we can do to build outdoor recreation infrastructure in Old Fort, because they recognize too that this had been a resource for the community in the past and it could be again. And so fast forward a lot, basically they said, if you guys can show us that you can get volunteers to come to Old Fort and work on the trails that you have, we'll begin the process of planning and looking at what new trails might look like in Old Fort. And so that's what we did. In 2017, we held the first trail work weekend at Camp Grier, and we had about 10 people show up, and it was great. We were really proud of that. We did work on Saturday and Sunday, but we kept doing that twice a year. So we would open up camp, and the second time we did it, 20 people showed up and 40. And so we kind of started to build this momentum. At the same time, we were talking to the Forest Service and talking to the community about where these trails might go. So everything that you see on the map, everything that's purple or pink or yellow, were trails that didn't exist prior to 2022. So through that volunteer work, through a lot of planning and community development, and through a lot of just luck and good timing, the Forest Service approved 42 miles of new trails to be built on public lands in Old Fort. This was the largest trail expansion on public lands in Western North Carolina since the CCC days. So it was a really big deal, and it really put Old Fort on the map. And so right after the Forest Service approved it, we were able to secure a grant from the Dogwood Health Trust in Western North Carolina to build the first 6 miles. And so all of a sudden you had this, trail project that had been in the planning stages. And then all of a sudden you had 6 miles that was under construction. So that really got people's attention. Coincidentally, at the same time, North Carolina changed the ABC laws, not to get too in depth in that, but it allowed breweries and wineries to have the same classification. So you could have a brewery or a winery anywhere you wanted. And so all of a sudden, Old Fort had this outdoor recreation infrastructure going in. And it also was able to have restaurants and breweries and wineries. So all of a sudden it was like, wow, Old Fort has arrived. So thanks for whoever's doing that. That really, it was really like flipping a switch in Old Fort. When we started construction of those first 6 miles of trails in 2022, you could see the businesses starting to come in. So we built 6 miles of trails, and I could drive you through town and we could point to 6 businesses that had opened. We built 14 miles, 14 businesses open. So now we're halfway through. We built 21 miles, and you've got 21 businesses in Old Fort that weren't there in 2021. So it really was like flipping a switch, and you could see it in town. You could see you couldn't find a place to park. The restaurants, the coffee shops were full. Our business was better than it had ever been. Our rental calendar was unbelievable. And so it really just created this momentum. And so the Forest Service was able to secure $4 million to improve visitor access and safety at Catawba Falls. If you guys have never been, definitely go. It's a really amazing experience that you can only get in Old Fort. And then we've been able to raise $4 million for ongoing trail development. So, that's $8 million of public land recreation infrastructure that's forming the base of this new economy in the community. And that kind of just shows you where, these are all like 2 miles apart, from each other. This is not a very big area. But we're bringing people who like to hike, fish, ride bikes, camp, backpack, just, all the things. So this $8 million of recreation infrastructure is expected to bring in about $30 million into the economy annually, with about 500,000 visitors each year. So we're about a half day's drive from 30 million.
Well, Jason, you guys tell them about the town council. This guy's loaded with humility, and he's not gonna go through it, but the town council fought. And he's just flooded them with revenue and new business, so I'm sure they've erected a statue now.
You're never gonna get everybody, right? Like, everybody's not gonna all get on the train, but most people did, I think they just, I think a lot of rural communities don't, there's just not the capacity there. You're working with a mayor and alder people who are working 8, 10, 12-hour days. And so when you bring a project, there's just not the capacity to execute it. And so it's really and it's not just unique to Old Fort. I think that's true for a lot of rural communities. There's just not the people there to do the work that's needed. And so you get nonprofits and other groups that just come in, and that was really the thing that flipped the switch for us, was that we realized that if we could change the forest, like if we could get the Forest Service to partner with us, it would change the town. Like it would do what we wanted it to do without having to get official, town approval or county approval or whatever. So it really was the struggle was real, as John would say, but I don't know if it was malicious, but I think they just didn't have the capacity and didn't have the vision. They didn't know that part of the economy. So all that work was done prior to those 21 miles were built. We had national attention at that point, and we were cruising. We thought, man, we made it through COVID. This is great. These next 10 years are just going to be fun. And then Helene decided to hit. So this is downtown Old Fort. So the white building that you see, that was one of the breweries that had opened. It was a brewery that was established by a local couple. They own a farm just south of Old Fort, and it was pretty much destroyed. Like all their brewery equipment inside was, really destroyed, and their business was interrupted like everybody else's. But Old Fort was really one of the harder hit areas. Like if you look, I mean, every area was hit really hard. But if you look at the rainfall totals, if you look at the forest canopy totals, it all funneled down into a lot of it funneled down into Old Fort because we're on the escarpment. So all that water that fell on Mount Mitchell eventually ended up in downtown. So a lot of our staff lost houses. Our employees, one of our employees' car floated basically from the entrance to camp down into town about a mile and a half. You might be able to see it in this picture. No, it's on the other side of the bridge, but if you see, this picture was kind of all over the place, but there's a red Altima in there somewhere. But it was really unbelievable amounts of water that came down into Old Fort. And we had a group of about 300 people that were supposed to come into camp that weekend. And we saw what was coming and we made everybody leave, basically. So there were about 75 people that had already come into camp for that group. And we ran around that Thursday morning after the first storm came and we said, y'all gotta leave. Like, we're not bringing in staff. We're not gonna be able to cook for you. If you stay here, we're not gonna be able to take care of it. You're probably gonna be stuck. So please go. Luckily, they all did. So we got everybody out. The one staff that was with me, he went back to his house in Asheville. Our maintenance director and his family were at the beach, which turned out to be great. I'll tell you in a second. But my wife, we sent her and her sister back to our house in Fletcher because we had a generator there. And so I stayed at Grier that Thursday and into Friday. So I was the only one there. And we lost power that night about 2 or 3 a.m. Couldn't sleep, just got up and kept getting in my truck and going to check the bridge and seeing how bad the creeks were coming out of camp. As it started getting light, I was like, well, I'll make coffee. So I had like all my backpacking stuff there. So I just made coffee on the counter and was sitting in the living room just watching it rain when a tree came through the director's house where I was. Started pouring rain inside the house. So I got out and sat in my truck. I put my helmet and my PFD on. Okay, like this is how this is gonna go, I guess. But at that point, the water was so high that even if I wanted to leave, I couldn't. So I was essentially stuck because the entrance to Camp Grier is the confluence of two creeks, Mill Creek and Jarrett Creek. And so the director's house, if you've ever been into Camp Grier, it's right there on the right as you go in. It was essentially looked like it was at a lake. So there was a river on both sides of the railroad tracks. And we were really stuck. So I was watching washing machines and propane tanks and trees and root balls and just all this stuff get washed down. And it was all going here. And you could really, between the hours of like 8, 11 that morning, you could see the water coming up. And what was happening was all the bridges and overpasses where the railroad tracks and the roads go into Old Fort, they were getting jammed up with debris. And the water would back up and it would release. So as soon as it broke through, the bridge on the other side or the tracks on the other side of where the water normally goes, the water would go down. And so the water at the director's house was just going up and down all morning long. But it was really, really an incredible experience that I never hoped to have to see again. But after it kind of started to slack off, I wanted to go check on our dam because I thought for sure we had lost it just because of the way the water was coming up and down. So I couldn't get up there on our road because it was still kind of a river. So I hiked up on the ridge just to look at the lake, and the lake held. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. So I came back down to the house, and there were some friends of mine that live in town that were walking up towards camp, and they're like, do you want to come back into town with us? And I said, sure. So I grabbed my bag, walked in, and this is kind of what you saw those first days. There was about a foot or so of mud in the town proper, just debris piles, all over the place. People wandering around in their housecoats with no shoes because they just had to leave that morning. I mean, it was really apocalyptic. People were driving, you had to drive just in crazy places to get around the bridges, and the road outside of camp was washed out. So it was really hard to describe just how bad it was. Once we got Starlink, I went back and checked the river gauges. And normally that creek right there, Mill Creek, and then it flows into the Catawba, that's normally like 300, 400 cubic feet a second. During Helena, it was 21,000 cubic feet a second, which is about the average flow of the Colorado River, up and through Old Fort. So, yeah, so, and the worst part of it was I was planning to stay in town, with my friends, but the natural gas smells in town were just so bad because the storm had knocked out water, sewer, fiber, natural gas. Like, you just couldn't, like, nobody light a match, like, please don't. So I went back to camp, and my wife and I owned the cottage just across the creek from camp. And so that's where we've been living for the past year while the director's house was being fixed. But really, it was in those immediate hours after the storm where our staff kind of started to come back. Our maintenance director came back from the beach, and luckily he had the wherewithal to buy a couple of generators, some chainsaws. He just packed his truck. Our kitchen manager, who lives right outside of camp, she came back, and it was never really a conversation that we had about what should we do. It was always like, okay, we're going to get this road fixed really quick so we can get people up here, because we knew with these generators we had water, ice, we were on a separate well and septic system. And we knew that camp could be kind of a lifeboat for Old Fort. And so within a couple of days, we got our road fixed and our bridges reconnected, and we were able to drive in and out of camp. And so because we had that big group coming in, we had our kitchen was stocked. We had huge amounts of food in our walk-in freezers and refrigerators and kitchen. And so Haven just started cooking. She was like, we've got to get rid of this food. And so initially we were cooking in our kitchen and taking food into town. And then eventually that transitioned to like, okay, we can get up here now, so let's have people come to camp. And then from there, things just kind of snowballed. We spent the next 60 days really just doing relief. So we were able to get a massive generator shipped from the South Carolina coast that ran all of main camp. And so within about 10 days, we were up and running, and we had supply deliveries coming in. We had people driving up, coming through camp, getting supplies and meals, taking showers, doing laundry. We were lodging crews that were coming from other areas to help. So these were like power people, police from outside agencies, because those first few nights, it was the Wild West. Like, there was no police presence. And so camp was really that kind of lifeboat for a lot of the community. Who hadn't had a shower in a week or 10 days. And so it was really, we felt really fortunate to be as stocked as we were, to have, camp be as unaffected, as it was. And to be able to do it. And the two, Ryan, our maintenance director, and Haven, our kitchen manager, Ryan lost his house that was right outside of camp, and then Haven's house was flooded. So they were doing this and not even thinking about what they had going on. But we were serving about 200 people a day in some capacity for about 60 days through October and November. So you can get it in that soon. So that was kind of the relief effort, like we did that. Every day it was 18-hour days. You just wake up, created the system to drive people through camp, to get all they needed, get their showers, their laundry, and head out. But camp also owns two race production companies that operate under our nonprofit umbrella. One is a mountain bike race production company called called Busy Productions, and the other is a trail running race production company called Tonal Adventures. And in those early days, they came in and said, we got to do something. And I was like, well, what do y'all want to do? And they said, we think we can have an event at camp to raise money to get people back in their homes. And I was like, well, if you think you can fill it, create the website, let's get the word out and see what happens. So they got to work, and they set a date for the weekend of December 6th. And so they got the registration up and created kind of the system, the courses. The Forest Service was willing to let us use the forest if we could get those trails that connected to camp open. And so they started planning an event, and they opened it up to 450 people. Each of those 450 people agreed to raise $1,500 for Helene rebuilding, and it sold out in about 48 hours. You know, so that weekend, each of those participants brought with them, you know, a person or two as kind of their crew. And so they were running or riding 6, 12, and 24-hour times, and getting people to basically sponsor them for each lap that they rode. By the end of the year, we almost reached $1 million by the end of the year in rebuilding funds. And to date, that effort has brought in over 2 million. We're probably at about 2.5 now. We just found out we got a couple of more grants last year. But it was really a good example of kind of like everything at camp firing on all cylinders at once. You know, it's like you had the kitchen crew doing what they do best. You had the race production team and the maintenance folks all doing their pieces. And it was just like, okay, like we've been building this capacity for years, and here it was just kind of all firing at one time. And so did that event, we pulled it off. During that event, we were able to announce the first $300,000 of grants to 6 families that went out the door. So we were able to, most of those first grants were to retire debt, because a lot of the homes that were impacted, the ones that were complete losses, those people were still having to pay mortgages. And so we were able to send like $50,000 of chunks out to people in the community that we knew were really in bad shape, just to give them some kind of hope, you know. And so, so that event, we had about 1,000 people at camp for that weekend, just, you know, between the participants and their crews and people from the community. Like a lot of the businesses came up, like the coffee shops, the wineries, the breweries, and they were selling things at this event. So they were able to, you know, kind of get some revenue going. So kind of relief, that initial 65 days of relief just transitioned right into recovery. And then after the event, we just kind of shut down. We were like, okay, we need a break. You know, we've done a lot. Let's go home and enjoy Christmas as best we can, and come back in the new year and have at it. See, I can go to the next slide. So once we got through that initial like 90 days, we did get a lot of the trails cleared that weren't damaged. So we were able to get some things back open for the event, to start making a plan for what the forest recovery was going to look like. But pretty much every trail was damaged. This is Newberry Creek. If you're familiar with that area, it's a great trout stream, native brook trout, good fishing up there. But this was a common scene in the forest. You had all this debris was just chock full. I mean, it was just unbelievable, and the water just would eat the road away. And then, you know, the road would come back later, and it was just really an unbelievable sight. But so we started working with the Forest Service. At the end of the year, the federal government passed the big Helene package, and National Forest in North Carolina got $2.6 billion for Helene and Milton recovery. And so we started working with the Forest Service. to figure out like, all right, what can we do? We're one of the larger US Forest Service partners in the grant, or probably the largest Forest Service partner in the grandfather district. And so they were wanting to put a lot of money into partnership agreements because there's no way the Forest Service could spend that amount of money in the time that they had in 5 years. And so, long story short, we were able to secure a $34 million US Forest Service lien recovery agreement we'll be working on for the next 5 years to basically rebuild the trails, parking lots, roads, bridges, everything that's on public land. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide.
What a story.
Yeah, so we're hiring, we're looking. So that was on the Forest Service side. So going back to the bigger trails and economy piece for a second, Camp had been working on a project called Grier Village for the past 3 years. And we had started on some visitor lodging, some new cabins basically on some property that's adjacent to camp, on the property that's the eye there. And so that was going on. We were about to close on a $16 million deal on camp property where G is. And so the lien kind of paused all that for a second. But we're back to building. So the cabins on I, they're 5-bedroom, 5-bath. They'll be coming online later this year for soft opening and then renting next year. And then Camp's portion of Grier Village, the $60 million piece, is workforce development, student housing in partnership with the community college. And our financial closing is scheduled for the end of this year. And that'll start construction next. And then H is kind of a retail village. So food, beverage, retail. And that's kind of still in the planning stages, but it's becoming real because we're putting some long-term rental units on that for Forest Service employees. So they'll have a place to live. So there was a lot of momentum. So now we were juggling this project. Now we're juggling the Forest Service agreement and we're juggling recovery and rebuilding. So there's a lot happening at camp right now. So you go to the next one. So the lien was bad, but the thing that we like to say is we're really glad it didn't happen in 2015 or 2016 because we wouldn't have had the nonprofit and community infrastructure to really respond to it like we did. Camp wouldn't have been in the place to do it. We wouldn't have had the relationship with the Forest Service. The community, those relationships just weren't there. And so what that looks like is that $8 million of recreation infrastructure that I was describing earlier, it really forms the basis of about $80 million of impact in nonprofit investment. So that's going to like the Grier Village project, which is a big chunk of that. McDougald Tech has opened a satellite campus in Old Fort and they've created a building there. There's another nonprofit that's bought 60,000 square foot warehouse space in Old Fort to make commercial real estate options available for small businesses in the local community. And then there's a community land trust that has bought land in Old Fort is developing a 9-unit attainable housing product for the outdoor recreation economy. And so all that is happening because those trails are being built. So it's really like if we could design an outdoor recreation community from scratch, what are the pieces that you would need? And we're actively putting those in. And it's not, these are all projects that are happening, like dirt is moving or things are done at all of these places right now. So so it's like camp is kind of at the center of that development. It's like there's that trail network and what we're doing. Our work in the community is really turning Old Fort into a model of rural recreation development. I think that's my last slide. Yes.
Jason, you act like
10:30.
you act like this just. Yeah, I can remember talking to this guy. I thought he was crazy. This is a camp director who decided he wanted to be a land planner and develop. And, I said, hey, I ain't gonna do that. And then they say, I know, because he talked about this trail relationship with the government. And I thought, good luck getting that done. And then what that would do for the community in terms of drawing business. You know, boom, there it is.
Yeah, it's happening. It's really cool to see it in real time. You know, it's really great to see the local community really grab a hold of it and take ownership of it, you know, and begin to talk about it. So that I'm not the one that's talking about it all the time.
Check it out.
But yeah, definitely, you know, that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, and I tried to leave some time for questions. So yes.
So I just wanted to give some backstory a little bit. So, my favorite camp is Camp Grier. The last time I was there was like 2011, 2012, and I can tell you it was kind of 1970s goodwill situation. So I know what that was like. So what he's talking about is just phenomenal. Thank you. It's phenomenal of going, you know, where you could go through. I mean, I know where the library is. I know where the little, I don't know if it's still there, the little train station museum,
Yeah.
you know, so, so what he's accomplished in the time is remarkable.
I appreciate that, Larry.
My favorite part is still camp. Tell us just a little bit about how camp's going.
Yeah, so camp is great, you know, our summer program, we're still doing about what we do every year, you know, 550 kids. We don't want to be the biggest camp in Western North Carolina, but summer is great. You know, we have a great staff, you know, they've been with us for a long time, and we're continuing to make improvements in camp itself, you know, and that's one of the things that was really important to the board was that, you know, we could do all this stuff around, which is great, but we wanted that Camp Grier to remain camp. And so, you know, while we're still doing renovations, the showers are still small. You still hit your knees on the doors when you close the door to the commode. You know, none of that has changed. It's still rough, you know, kind of rustic. But we're making improvements for sure. You know, we're building a covered pickleball and basketball court there currently. It'll be done by the end of the year. And so it'll still be camp. But what I like to tell people is historically, we've been a summer camp that did a few things in the fall and spring to make ends meet. And now we're flipping that model so that we're an outdoor recreation destination that also has a summer camp. So we're still committed to access, you know, outdoor access for all. We still have a pretty robust scholarship component. Our summer camp price is about $1,000 less than most other outdoor programs of similar capacity. So we feel good about that. We still, you know, we're really committed to making that experience open to all. Good question.
I have a question. As I was watching this, and I used to work with the youth here in this church, it seems like a perfect place for our youth group to do a mission kind of thing. Do you ever host those kinds of groups at the camp and then have them working on the trails or?
We do,
things
yes,
like that?
absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the things that's great about the Grier Village project is it'll give us lodging options for all those different user groups. So the cabins will still be the same. You can pack 20 kids in a cabin and go out and do trail work or go out and do mission work with you know, for recovery. Or, you know, if you want to have a cabin up on Copper Ridge that's 5 bedrooms, 5 bath and has internet, and you know, I would love to stay in, you can do that too, you know, so we're trying to have the historical bunk lodging that we've always had, but also some other tiers that are appropriate for other groups. So yeah, we'd love to have youth groups come out and do trail work with us.
You do family groups too?
We do. We have a family camp in the fall and the spring every year, so we do that as well. Yeah.
What's the organization's operating budget?
It's a good question. So in 2013, it was about 350,000. Last year, prior to Helene, it was about 3 million. And then last year, because of Helene, it was a little closer to 6 million because of just all the, you know, funds that were coming in. So yeah, it's roughly 10x.
But the funds come in quick enough for all of us.
They do. Yeah, I mean, you know, our base of support is broad. So we're a much more grantable organization now than we were a decade ago. You know, so that was one of the nice things about after Helene is we had already established relationships with a lot of the foundations in Western North Carolina, so they were able to send money quickly to us. We were able to then push that out. So yeah, the budget and pre-Helene time was about 10x what it was a decade ago. Yeah. But all that revenue is really coming from that trail infrastructure and some of these other events that we're doing in the off season, whether it's groups, church groups, youth groups, events, weddings, things.
The Forest Service got cut budget ones. Is that affecting you?
It affects us, well, I'll say in North Carolina, it hasn't. North Carolina's Forest Service is very unique in the Forest Service system. If you get a chance, if you know anybody that works there, thank them, because they do a good job of protecting and managing that forest. And so they did lose some folks, but not as much as other districts and other, states. So we've been really fortunate in North Carolina. That being said, I think part of the reason that it hasn't been impacted as much is because over the last decade, they've really focused on developing partners like us to build capacity. So like this year, probably by the end of the year, we'll do about 4,000 hours of volunteer work on national forest land surrounding Old Fort. So they've really committed to building those partners. So like us, Wild South, the Northwest North Carolina Mountain Bike Alliance, Pisgah, Sorby, all these groups, Mountain Tree, that do volunteer work on the forest. They made an intentional effort to build that capacity and empower those groups to really help them steward the forest. So it's definitely not the best time to be in the Forest Service world, but North Carolina is doing a good job of holding it together.
You're obviously doing a lot of amazing things. How big is your staff for fundraising and development and marketing?
Yeah, it's another great question. So our total staff right now is about 25. It was 2.5 in 2013. And a half was important in 2013. Yeah, it's not much, we have a marketing or communications firm out of Asheville that we work with, and they do a great job of handling all of our emails and social media and all that. And then development, we just hired a development person to kind of help us organize donor lists and grants and all that stuff. But historically, that's been kind of pieced together and kind of more under my umbrella, but yeah. I keep working myself out of jobs as well. So, yeah, but yeah, we have about 25 year-round staff. Yeah, all great questions.
Where are your maintenance people living and the kitchen person that houses live?
Yeah, so our kitchen person, she was able to apply to the fund and get some relief to help her get her AC unit replaced in her house, get the mud out of her house. So she's good. And then there was some landscaping that was done. So her house is good. Our maintenance director, he's actually living in a camp. So his house, he was renting to his son. And this is actually a good story because it kind of shows how holes get developed in recovery. So he had bought a house just outside of camp, and he was renting that house to his son and his son's girlfriend, who also happens to be our equestrian director. And that was the house that got destroyed in the storm. So his son and his girlfriend moved up to camp, and they're living in a trailer, like a mobile, like a camper that you would see pulled behind a truck until that house is rebuilt. And so they were able to apply to the fund as well. We were able to retire his debt, and then other organizations like the Fuller Center and some Presbyterian churches in Virginia raised money. But this was where there was like some inflexibility in the FEMA process because FEMA classifies that as a second home. So he wasn't able to get that 43,000 FEMA money, and then because it was flood, his insurance, he wasn't required to have flood insurance, so there was no insurance for him, and so as we experience more of these natural disasters, it's gonna be really important to figure out how to get more of those decisions made at the local level, so that somebody can say, oh, I see, this isn't a second home, this is attainable housing in a community that really needs attainable housing, you know? So, but they're doing great. They're gonna be back in their home hopefully by the end of the year, and they're really excited about it. He did move it up the hill about 10 feet. It's dealing with this again. We haven't.
Get insurance.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it is a little bit higher on the hill. It's got a little bit more of a foundation, but yeah, they're living in a camper.
How many of you know Fletcher Wright? Anybody, while you're in town, Robinson Bradshaw? You know, Julian.
Yeah.
Fletcher, my apologies, Julian Wright. Julian hired this guy, and it was a long time board member, chaired the board for probably 5 years or longer, back 2010 and stuff. So if you know Julian, give him a pat on the back.
They were really, that committee that transitioned to the board, they were really great because they gave me a long runway and they gave me a lot of latitude to be entrepreneurial. And that's really what's served us well over those years. So, yeah, Julia and Claire was on it for a long time, and William Riker, and a lot of folks that just believed early. We're grateful for him.